Snake handlers have the privilege of working with and rescuing such amazing animals. This does, however, mean that they have the misfortune of meeting some very peculiar people and getting into some strange situations. In this episode of Snake Heroes, our snake heroes will tell us what are their strangest snake stories.
One of the best memories I have of a snake removal was in 45th Cutting in Durban many years back. And guys had emptied out a double garage for a party, but there was a big old wooden cupboard in the corner that they couldn't get out. And someone had spotted a snake under this cupboard, and they couldn't quite reach it. They were sticking their hands down there, and they eventually took a wire coat hanger, and they bent it, and they tried to hook the snake out, and they weren't very successful. And at about 11 at night, they phoned me. When I got there, these guys were properly drunk. And I shone a torch under this cupboard, and there was a 2.5 meter black mamba, and he had his mouth open, and he was sick and tired of seeing these hands coming in and coat hangers coming in, and how no one was bitten, I have no idea.
Strange calls. Ones that I can think of is families that have prayed over me when I've caught a snake. They've prayed over me and prayed over the snake and over my safety and stuff like that. Yeah, that's, I don't know, it's a bit strange.
I once had a lady phoning me frantic. She said, "My boss saw a cobra at his lodge." I said, "Well, that's where they should be, at a lodge. That looks like a reserve to me." She said, "Yeah, it is a reserve. The lodge is in a reserve, but he doesn't want it there." I said, "What do you mean he doesn't want it there?" "No, he doesn't want the snake there. You must take it away, and you must poison the whole area around the lodge so that there are no snakes there." I said, "I cannot do that. That you cannot do. It's a nature reserve. You cannot do anything like that." I said, besides that, I just don't go out for call-outs. I want the snake to be spotted, then I'll go out because I charge a call-out fee to go and catch a snake. She then wanted to find out from me, what is the call-out fee? I didn't want to go, because this was far away to go to this place. So I just made a large number, 10,000 Rand plus VAT. So 11,400 Rand is the invoice. And I thought that would be the end of it. She put the phone down. 5 minutes later, she phoned. She said, "The boss says you must go." So I promptly gave her the invoice. They paid. And then the next day, I went to this lodge, which was a 3-hour drive. Found nothing. But I could see that this particular place where this lodge was situated was spitting cobra heaven. It was just rocks and crevices next to a stream. And the lodge was just built in the wrong place. They will forever and a day find snakes there. It's a nice place to have a lodge, but if you're not happy with snakes, it's not a nice place. But yeah, so that was a good call out from me. No snake, but a good payment.
Probably the strangest call out I've ever had was a nighttime call out, probably around about 11 o'clock, 11:30 at night, from a frantic lady saying there are snakes all over her lawn. And I questioned her if she could tell me what color or shape or size. She couldn't. She just said she is absolutely phobic and there are snakes all over her lawn. I said, "Well, 3 or 4 or 5, just get here. She doesn't care what I charge for the call out. She knows it's late. There are just snakes everywhere." So I arrive at her property, ring the gate buzzer, and she says she can't let me in because I'll drive over the snakes. So she says I need to climb over the wall. So I look over the wall and I can't see any snakes. And she's shouting at me from the window that there's snakes everywhere. Eventually I jump over the wall, and as I'm approaching the house, this lady is screaming that I'm standing on the snakes. And I found no snakes. I don't know if she was hallucinating or if she'd had a bad dream or what her case was, but that was very, very strange. She paid me and she made me promise never to tell anybody the story. So I just did that.
Probably the strangest snake catching incident that I've personally experienced was when I was a master's student down in Durban, working at the snake park as well, collecting data, localities of where snakes were occurring, getting called out to a person's property where there was some feces that were obviously snake feces on their garage floor, and it was right underneath their car. And we put two and two together, and I climbed under the car, and eventually, after using a torch for quite some time, saw the coils of a black mamba on top of the petrol tank of the car. And so, lying on my back there, I had to unscrew and unbolt the petrol tank, drop the petrol tank to get the mamba out. And that mamba, based on the presence of the feces on the garage floor, had been sitting on top of that petrol tank for several days. And during that time, the person had driven into the city center to do shopping and so on and so forth, and probably has took the snake with her. But the most unusual encounter with an animal doing my snake research was when we were doing a project on telemetrid puff adders, and quite often the most common predator of a puff adder in the area where I was working was snouted cobra. So we soon learned to detect the change in behavior if our puff adder became a meal for a cobra, and the cobra was much more active and moving further and so on, that our snake had now been eaten. And we had an incident where one of the snakes had been eaten, and as was normal for the cobras, they'd often go underground, and then they would vomit up. After the meal had been digested, they'd vomit up the transmitter, and I would try and recover the transmitter. And I was digging out the burrow in which the transmitter was, and next minute a rattle came hurtling out and effectively tried to attack me. It's quite disarming. Sort of I backed off into the bush and fell over onto my back, and then the rattle raced off into the distance. But that was probably the most surprising incident. And then I guess tracking snakes, being engrossed in tracking snakes and walking straight into rhino or giraffe or animals like that.
Other strange ones is like arriving at a family house, and the mother and daughter both come to greet you at the door, only wearing their underwear, and bringing you into the house for a snake that's in the bedroom. And they're standing around talking to you, and you're having to answer their questions. And here's these two women that are in only their underwear. Yeah, it was a bit strange.
A guy said he was turning over some logs, clearing out his garden, and he found a snake. So he phoned me. We discussed that I do charge a fee for a call out if he can afford it. He agreed to the fee. He said, but only if I catch the snake. So no, that sounds reasonable if the snake is there. Arrived there, turn over the first log, which he had not yet actually turned over, and there was a bright green snake under the log, a little spotted bush snake. So I caught the snake, and he says, but that's not the snake that I saw. Fair enough. So I bagged the bush snake, carry on turning over logs. Under that log pile, we found that bush snake, 4 house snakes, 2 heralds, and a night adder. So I said to the chap, by your reckoning, you're only paying if I catch the snake. I've caught now an abundance of snakes. Do you multiply the call out fee by 6 or 7, or do you just call it quits? And he said, no, we'll call it quits. Another very strange one was a man phoned me. He said he's got a 3-meter black mamba in a 5-liter oil drum. So in my head, I'm picturing an oil drum, okay? And as so we said, well, look, I'll come through. Have you caught it? Yes, he's caught it, but he wants it taken away. So not a problem. And he says it's 3 meters. I said, look, I very much doubt it's 3 meters, but nonetheless. And as I'm driving, I'm thinking 5 liters, but that's a little kitchen oil container. There's no way he's got a 3-meter mamba in a 5-liter oil container. So I arrive at the guy's house, and lo and behold, there's this 5-liter oil container, clear, so I can see the snake through it. And it is a black mamba, and it's a big black mamba. So he says to me, should we take a bit of a bet on this? No, not. Anyway, we'll see. He says, I'll tell you what, if it is 3 meters, you pay me $300. If it's not 3 meters, I'll pay you $300. So no, fair enough, let's have a look at this. So we open the drum. I'm pretty certain it's not going to be 3 meters. He's pretty certain it is. We cut open this oil drum, and we measure this black mamba that's covered in oil. It was 2.85 meters. So it wasn't quite 3 meters, but we agreed that for 15 centimeters we'd call it quits. Now, how he got the snake into the drum, it was crawling along this fence line. He saw it, he put the oil drum down in front of it, held it down with a stick, and as the snake stuck its head into the oil drum, he just pushed the body in behind it and put the lid on. That I thought was pretty unusual.
I think the most memorable call out I I ever had was my husband was away, he was in Cape Town, and I got this frantic call for a mamba. And at the same time, there was a tremendous lightning storm. And so if it's one thing I'm afraid of, it's lightning. And I had to go on this call out in the middle of nowhere, in between the sugarcane, all by myself in this horrific storm, to go and try and help this lady. And while I was driving there, the power went off. It was pitch black, so the only lights I could see was my car lights. And the snake, the black mamba, was right in front of the door to her children where they were sleeping. And this must have been 10 o'clock at night. And she was trying to tell me, but because it's just a rural village, to try and get directions when it's a huge thunderstorm. And I was trying to find her and I couldn't find her. And I was in the end sobbing, she was sobbing. Every time the lightning would strike, my heart would stop, and I was trying to, it was dreadful. And I said to her, she had a candle, and that's all the light she had. So I said to her, well, put your candle in the window, and I'll try and see the light in your window. Because I was going past all these little rural houses, and I couldn't see her, I couldn't find her house. And she had about an inch left of her little candle, which she then went and put on the windowsill. And I found her by that little inch of her candle. And I got there and she had a whole lot of pile of books, and I managed to take the mamba out from behind that pile of books. But it's probably the most memorable call out I've ever been on. As far as the strangest, I suppose a frog, a bullfrog. I was called out to go and catch a snake in a hole, and it turned out to be a bullfrog. That's my strangest call out.
Yeah, on call-outs you do find yourself in strange situations, like having to catch a black mamba out of someone's bedroom cupboard or kitchen cupboard. It's quite, if you think about it, you know, like black mamba is one of the most famous snakes in the world. It's known to be, well, it has a dangerous bite, and to think it's in someone's bedroom cupboard and the fright they get, you know, it's interesting. I also have been called out and it's like a rat or it's not a snake. I got called for a headless toy snake once, you know, so you get some real time wasters, but at the end of the day you can laugh about it.
A few years ago I got a phone call. It was in the middle of winter. We don't get many call outs in winter. So somebody phoned and said they had 2 puff adders at their house, and the woman was going to give her husband half an hour and then they were going to shoot the snake. So I said, well, look, give me half an hour, I'll be there in time. Went racing out there, and I said to them, where are the snakes? And they said, well, there's the one and there's the other one. And I could make out there were 2 parts of puff adder. And I picked up the plank that they were lying under, and it turned out it was 1 puff adder. The puff adder was 1.2 meters long, had a massive girth on her, and she eventually, I kept her because she was gravid or full of babies, and she gave me 84 babies that year. So I took them in batches of 5 and released them. Every farm in that area that looked like they needed puff adders got 5 baby puff adders, and I also released a big female. So it was one of the more unusual ones. You expect to go out there and catch 2 snakes, and you find this one giant snake. But then I've also had other phone calls where people have called me and they've said they think they have a snake in their garden, and you get there and it's definitely not a snake. I've caught warthog, I've caught porcupines, I've caught the funniest animal that we ever had was we had a call out for a waterbuck almost in the center of Pretoria in somebody's garage. And where it came from, I have no idea. How it got there, I have no idea. We managed to dart it and had it moved to a friend's place where it subsequently escaped and it went back into the bush. So we get really unusual calls where you expect to find a snake and then you find something completely different, and you're not prepared for that, because to catch a porcupine is a bit different to catching something like a cobra.
Yeah, there's been a few strange animals that have turned up that weren't even snakes, but people thought they were snakes. Frogs, crabs, rats, earthworms. Other than things that weren't even animals, like belts and tires and watch straps and things like that. Are you sure it wasn't this that you saw?
No.
This. You think it could have been that? By the look on your face, I think it was that. I've been called out for dogs. I've been called out for a duiker, bats. In fact, quite a few bats. Bats have flown into people's houses. Mongooses, spiders, kittens. Yeah, all sorts of funny things.
So many years ago, I was doing a herpetofauna survey on Tswalu, Kalahari Reserve. And myself and my wife were doing the survey together. And we got given this old 4x4 diesel engine. I was driving slowly, and at that point we hadn't yet seen a Cape Cobra. And we were driving early in the morning, you know, just scanning around, and I spotted this Cape Cobra disappearing into the bush, and I really wanted the snake, and without even thinking about it, I just jumped right out of the car, even though I was driving, and ran after the snake. And the thing is with an old diesel bakkie is that they don't stall, so it doesn't die. So this car was just carrying on its own, and Ursula must have been struggling so hard to get this car to come to a standstill, which she obviously told me about afterwards. But in the meantime, I had caught the snake, and I was yelling at her to bring me a hook stick so that I could handle it. And here I didn't even realize that she might be in an accident in the car or something. So that was kind of bad on my behalf. But I was just so overwhelmed with joy and excitement and just the necessity to catch the snake that I'd thrown all caution to the wind. Of course, these days I'm much safer but that was, well, quite a while back. That was quite funny.
I also get some strange phone calls. Like once I was called for a snake with 7 heads, and one of the 7 heads had a light on it. So in those situations, you don't really know what to say. I told that lady, call the police, but that's something like that obviously doesn't exist. I think she'd been drinking.
Sure, strange animals on call-outs. Yeah, we've had a few. People phone the snake guys because they think with snake guys we can deal with anything. We can't. We can do snakes. We might know all the other animals, but they're certainly not things that we deal with. Large spiders I've dealt with quite easily and effectively. Not my favorite animal, but we don't hurt them. Yeah, one was bats. I got a call out for a snake in the roof. How they mistook these bats for a snake, I don't know. But I went up into this dark roof, inside the ceiling, came around this dark corner, and there dangling from the ceiling were 3 bats. And I screamed like a girl and left, and the bats carried on with their life. Another one was actually an interesting one. I got called for a porcupine right where I live in suburbia. Porcupine in one of those underground drains. And we looked at it, we saw it was a porcupine, and we left it. I don't know what they thought I was going to do, but anyway, so that porcupine was left in the drain. I don't know if the Parks Board came and dealt with it, but I didn't. Other things we get are not so many animals, but what people still mistake for snakes. Belts, shoelaces, rubber snakes. Rubber snakes the kids have put somewhere either to surprise or they've just forgotten and the parents get surprised. All sorts of things like that. So people have this absolute phobia of snakes, that anything that they can't understand and looks like a snake, a bent or curved piece of wire. I caught a creepy crawly hose on the local freeway because somebody thought it was a snake on the side of the road. So I've caught many things that are not in fact snakes. It's very weird, very interesting.
One of my favorite experiences to recount during herpetofauna surveys was when I was in Liberia a few years ago. I was surveying the forest streams in the dry season for amphibian species of conservation concern, because that's when they breed in these streams when the water level is low. And I was all on my own, probably about 2 kilometers or so into the forest from the nearest road, and it was just wonderful, and I was really enjoying the experience. And while I was walking up the river, I was seeing a lot of orange eyes from the spiders on the side of, on the banks of the rivers and logs in the river, etc. And suddenly there was this orange eye that was just a bit brighter than all the other orange eyes. And I slowly went to investigate, and it was a baby dwarf crocodile. And it was just so wonderful to see these guys. And then I saw another and another, and suddenly there were about 4 or 5 of them, all just in this like small pool to the side of the river. And I was standing there and I was thinking, okay, well, maybe I should catch one to just take a nice photograph of it for the report, or maybe I can take a photograph of them like this. And all of a sudden, in the middle of this pool, the big mother surfaced. And I mean, dwarf crocodiles don't get very big, but she was big by comparison of these to these little ones. And she just looked at me and then just slowly went down again and then disappeared. And it was just so awe-inspiring to be part of this whole little family there in the middle of the forest, all on my own. And I still remember recounting that I was so overwhelmed with this joy, but I couldn't share it with anybody because nobody was there. And usually my wife is there surveying with me, but in this particular instance, I had to go on my own. And it was so amazing. But then I had to bottle all these emotions up before I got back to camp later, and when I could share it with the other biologists that were there on the survey. But that was definitely a very special moment for me in my career.
So I get a lot of calls for bees, genets, and dassies that are hiding out in someone's roof. I also get called for monitor lizards, which I do deal with, the leguan, as people know it here. I do catch and remove those. The strangest, well, I suppose it was more of the saddest as well. I got called for a genet that had been hit by a car, and his one eye was hanging out, and he looked like he was dying. And as I picked him up, he spun around and latched onto my thumb, which was damn sore. But yeah, shame. I raced him to the vet, and he passed away. But yeah, you do get calls for weird creatures.
When I was at university, my parents were staying on Bloberg Nature Reserve up in Limpopo. They had an environmental education center there. And I would go home for holidays, and I'd just come back for a holiday, and my dad told me that there was a lady coming to remove bees from the nearby baobab because these bees were sending out small swarms, and they were coming to the house, and my sister was very small at that stage, so it was quite a problem. So we needed to remove this bee, and he said he's going to go there early in the morning if I want to come with and watch. And of course I wanted to, but being a student back in those days, I was a bit of a late sleeper. So he woke me up and said, look, he's got to go now, but I can just come and join him. So I know where the baobab was, so I decided to just put on my shoes and just quickly run through the veld towards the baobab. So while I was running through the field, I was getting a bit tired, and all of a sudden, I never saw the snake, but all of a sudden I just stopped dead in my tracks. And what happened was, I'd stopped dead, and there was this mamba. She was about hip height to me at that stage. Her head was raised off the ground, and I was standing there just as still as I could, but of course I was breathing quite heavily, so I was moving, I was going like this, and she was very close, very, very close. And when you encounter a snake in the wild, the best thing to do is to stand still, obviously, which is what I did, but I didn't know how effective it was going to be with this heavy breathing. So it felt like ages, but it could have only been a few seconds while we were standing there eyeballing each other. And then she slowly lowered her head down to the ground, very slowly, and she started flicking her tongue on the ground. So she was smelling around on the ground, which was quite strange. I thought the moment there was no sign of danger, she would shoot off, but she didn't. So she was flicking the ground just in front of my boot, and like on the other side of my boot. She slowly moved over my boot, so the snake's body was actually going over my boot, and she was flicking the ground. And then I saw movement out of the corner of my left eye, and it was a young hare, probably scrub hare, that just went kaboom, kaboom. And she was following the scent trail of this scrub hare, and the scrub hare went and she was just going slowly, slowly. So she moved over my boot. Most of her body didn't go over it, but part of it went. And she was just trying to follow the scent trail that this hare was leaving. So I was really hoping to see her actually catch the hare. But unfortunately what happened was the hare went into some dense grass, and she just followed the trail and went exactly into the dense grass where the hare was, and then slowly I lost sight of her. And it was just such a powerful experience to be so close to such a majestic animal, have her just behaving naturally, because I obviously gave her a big fright because I arrived there suddenly and she didn't know what was going on. But then because I wasn't in any way aggressive or didn't frighten her, even with my heavy breathing, which was interesting, she just ignored me entirely and just moved off after this hare and went on her way and did her thing. And it was just such a magnificent experience. And then while I was busy recounting just what had happened, the swarm of bees arrived, and then I had to run back the other direction because the bees were all over the show, and I had to get out of there. So, but yeah, that was probably one of my favorite encounters with a mamba or any large venomous snake in the wild. Yeah.
In the next episode of Snake Heroes, we'll find out from our snake experts how they feel about free-handing venomous snakes, and we will also find out whether or not they've ever been bitten by a venomous snake.